How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to our next CRO module. In this module, we'll be covering the top 6 strategies for improving app UX and engagement. James, looking forward to diving into this one. A lot of good things in store.
All right, let's go. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about why mobile app UX matters. Again, we talked about in some of the other modules, if you've watched them, the mobile app is a really kind of unique opportunity to engage on a very personal device on a person in a one-to-one manner that isn't possible with a lot of other kind of digital tools or experiences out there. It's something that people carry with them. It's something that's habit forming, both good and bad. And so you have to be very conscious of how is your user interface designed, and how does that kind of affect the user experience that the person has as they engage with your app. And it's super important to be creating a great experience from the very first seconds that people are engaging with you, from the user experience on your app store listing to the launching of your app, and that initial onboarding experience. And the user experience there is just so critical, because you can lose people very quickly. The expectation the expectation for mobile apps is so high now for it to be completely intuitive and customized and personalized. So it's just really critical that you spend a lot of time looking at that user experience. So again, as I mentioned, as the person moves through the app experience, at each level of engagement, you need to be cognizant of how good your user experience is. That initial onboarding flow is really critical. There's a lot of things you can accomplish during that flow. You can introduce them to what your app does. In a lot of cases, people will download your app not really understanding what it does. They may or may not, likely they have not read your description on the App Store. They may have quickly glanced at your screens. They may have found it through search. A friend may have just mentioned you by name and they go to check you out, but they don't have a complete understanding of what your app does. So it's really critical during that initial onboarding flow to introduce people to, what it is that what are the key features of your app and key functionalities. And there's a lot of different ways to do that we'll get into later. And again, as much as you can, try to personalize that user experience to the individual by collecting data as the user moves through that initial journey. And then, there's a really kind of critical moment when the user is going to do something in the app that's going to get them coming back. So many times you kind of have that one shot at getting somebody, they install the app, maybe they wait a couple of days before opening it. They've kind of forgotten who you are. And they go in there, and if you don't create some kind of hook to get them coming back, they may experience your app once and just kind of forget about you, because maybe they downloaded you plus 2 or 3 of your competitors. And by the time, they go through your other competitors and maybe they have a hook that's getting them back, you're going to have lost them. So, there's some great articles, and there's actually even a book on this idea of a hook. And the idea is you need to analyze how your users, and sometimes you can kind of attempt to do a hook, by thinking of it ahead of time, but often these hooks emerge through usage, and it's hard for you to know until someone's actually using your app. If you have multiple features, what's going to be that one thing to get them to come back? But it's a really important kind of touch point within your app to think about at least one hook. Maybe you've got 2 or 3, but at least one that's going to get them coming back a second time. And we can talk more about that hook later in this presentation. Anyway, you need to have a great navigation. Again, it's sort of the expectation. You want to have a navigation set up in a fashion that's easy to access with your thumbs. That's very unique to mobile apps. And again, icons are critical, and having icons that work across different languages and nationalities that are universal. And again, something that may be intuitive to you as a developer or founder may not be intuitive to other people. So it's really important to kind of test these with multiple types of customers. Like, do they understand what that little icon means? Because if they have to click on every icon and then kind of try to figure out what it is they just clicked on because it wasn't clear from the icon, that's going to create kind of a bad user experience out of the gate. So make sure your buttons and icons are really designed in a way that they're universally understandable. as you kind of evolve your user experience and come up with these different life cycle strategies, it's just so important to be leveraging, the user feedback that's coming in through your app store reviews. It's also really critical to try to collect feedback, within your app, have some kind of support chat feature if you can, or just easily accessible email link where they can try to get problems resolved or send in feature requests or, feature improvements. Because if those things end up in the App Store alongside a 1-star review or a 2-star review, that's going to hurt you negatively. It's going to hurt your conversion rate. It's going to hurt your ASO. Negative reviews are going to kill you. So if you can kind of find a way to collect that feedback outside the official App Store review channel, the better off you're going to be. But if it does show up there, obviously you have to deal with it and also incorporate it into any kind of changes you're going to make. And then as much as you can, try to have your data collection set up so that you can monitor, the ongoing engagement. There's a lot of great tools out there, and we'll provide you with like a list of some of the tools, but there's a lot of mobile app specific platforms where you can do integrated engagement marketing, where you're hitting all the touch points, you're doing in-app messaging, you're doing push notifications, you're doing email messaging, and it's all integrated. The different touch points are aware of whether or not you've already interacted with that message in another touch point. So that's, again, it's really critical to the ongoing user experience and kind of, improving your life cycle strategies to be able to message people at various touch points consistently, but also sort of efficiently and effectively using some of these tools that are available. So, diving deeper into this idea of a smooth onboarding flow. So there's, a few key things that, and every app's going to be a little different, but obviously all of them need to be intuitive. People need to be able to move from one screen to the next. Obviously, if you can create kind of a simplified experience, this idea of path where, your app may have multiple options at every step of the journey in the final version that they're interacting with. But during the onboarding flow, it's often best to try to simplify the user experience to, what's known as like the 80% rule, where, most of your users are going to follow this path anyway. So just limit the path to that experience. And then they can maybe customize it further once they've gotten through that initial onboarding experience and been able to use your app and use the different features in it. And then they can kind of customize it further. But often it's not a great idea to throw everything in your kitchen sink at them right out of the gate, but kind of limit that experience. And then, another thing that most apps do these days is, and I'm sure you've seen them, looking at other apps, but usually there's 3 to 4 marketing screens that show up at the front of the app. The app loads, and before you start any kind of, data collection or registration, there's just a few screens that basically reiterate what your app is about. And presumably, you have this similar messaging in your any kind of advertising, your Facebook ads, that videos that brought them there. They're going to hit the App Store. You're going to have the feature and value prop messaging in your first 3 or 4 App Store screens. But you have to you ought to reiterate those key messages once they get to the app, because maybe it's a friend that told them about them and they didn't watch a video about your app. Maybe they skipped very quickly through your App Store screens and didn't read them effectively, or maybe they downloaded your app a week ago and have forgotten what the messaging in your App Store screens were. So it's important to kind of reiterate those essential messages and value props feature set in a handful of marketing screens. And often I kind of leverage that same messaging I'm using in the App Store, so you can double down on that. And then as much as you can, try to collect some valuable data during that onboarding without it being too, you don't want to gum up the works, and you want to get them through the process. But there's a way to collect data so that you're kind of providing a valuable experience. You're helping the user to understand better what their problem is, how your app can solve that problem, and it's convincing them that you as an app maker understands where they're coming from. And all that can happen while you're collecting data with some like simple questions about their preferences in what they might want to use the app for, the reasons they're doing it. And I've seen these things go on, and it shocks me sometimes how long this process of user data collection, and it's a combination of data collection and sell in, because ultimately you're trying to teach the user what your value proposition is through these questions. But there's an app out there called Noom, for example, and I think they have close to 40 screens that you have to go through. And it's a layered selling process. It's like an onion that unfolds before you. But by the end of it, you're either so exhausted by it that you're just going to friggin' subscribe to the app, or you understand that this app actually is going to solve this problem that you have. And in their case, it's better dieting and exercise. So anyway, I would suggest limiting it maybe to 5 to 10 screens. But if you do it well and you're communicating testimonials and milestone data and all kinds of other things in there, you can actually kind of keep it going and really sell people into your app experience during that onboarding. And then, sometimes like text alone won't do it. I've worked with apps where, especially if there's kind of a complicated setup where you have to maybe change the settings on the iPhone itself, often having like a little short video in there. And again, you don't need to do video. You can do a little animated GIF, so you don't have to invoke the video player, which can be, data intensive and a heavier weight on the app experience. But just throw a little animated GIF in there that kind of shows them where they need to go. I'm a big fan, if you've got a complicated interface and you can't really simplify it, just have like little pop-up in-app messages. And I'm sure you've seen these in apps, but it goes a long way to explaining to users, if it's a complicated app, how to use it better. And then as much as you can, provide ongoing support. People, have chat support on their website. Some cases you can, bring it into your app, but at a minimum, have some kind of FAQ section in the settings. You can host this on your website, so that basic questions about how the features work or how the setup works, the user can find the answer to those quickly in FAQ, so they're not going again to the review on the App Store and saying, hey, this app sucks because I couldn't even figure out how to work. If you can, prevent some of that stuff by proactively setting up FAQs in your app that are easily accessible, that'll be super, super helpful to get people through that onboarding. So here's an example of some of those things I was talking about. So the one in the upper left there it's a kind of an Airbnb for boats app. And the idea is that you can pop up these different messages when someone hovers over, maybe it's an icon, maybe it's, a link to something, but it just sort of shows them in app, how the different functionality. And again, once they've seen it, you don't have to show it again. You can maybe have these messages, exist in your settings or something if they need to refer back to them. But this is a kind of in the moment when they're first being introduced to your app. Upper right is an example of a preference quiz, which again helps teach you about how the app can help you. It's maybe learning some information that you can use to understand your audience better, or tweak the app better, or maybe help with your marketing. But it also helps the user to understand that you're familiar with the space, you understand what their problem is, and you understand it well enough that you're able to create an app that's really going to solve their problem. Lower left there is a video tutorial I created. Again, it's not an actual video, it's just a little animated GIF with a step-by-step instructions. In this case, this particular app required people to go in and change a half a dozen settings on their iPhone itself for it to work. So we wanted to make sure that they understood how to do that. And so we had images, a video image showing them where to go in their settings. And then again, the last one on the lower right there is just kind of an example of kind of a combination of quiz questions with informational, and then a really simple way to kind of set up the app during onboarding so it's ready to go when you finish it. So they have just a very simple, for example, in this particular one, it's about sleep, and they want to know, like, what time do you want to get up in the morning? And instead of having like a big complicated time setup, which they do elsewhere in the app, the presentation is just in a very simple, intuitive fashion during the onboarding flow to get them going quickly into the app. So again, diving a little bit deeper into the content personalization. So I'm sure most of you, if you're in marketing, are familiar with the idea of a persona. So you want to try to figure out, what different types of users are using your app. That's obviously very critical for your marketing. You want to be able to target people based on their personas, but you also, if possible, want to kind of tailor your app experience to those personas as well as much as possible. And you do that through kind of an adaptive UI. And again, if you can code this in and have some dynamism so that the app interface is matching their preferences and matching the kind of persona that they're coming from, the more you can do that, the better off you are. But you can also just kind of add to your credibility by asking questions that will lead people to assume that you're doing some of this, even if you at the beginning can't do it that well. And again, personalization engines on the back end are really the way to do this effectively, so that it's coded and dynamically working. Of course, you got to do a lot of QA with this sort of thing, and again, go in there and pretend you're coming in with different sort of personas to make sure that the user experience is going to be meaningful for all the different types of people coming into your app. Again, depending upon your app, you can also customize or personalize based on where that person is, what time of day it is. So there's a lot of different ways you can personalize that are kind of beyond what the person is, but in more related to where they are or what they're doing. Obviously, any kind of app that has a mapping component is going to be presenting information or data based on where that user is, in relationship to the map. But there's other ways you can do that as well. And again, as we've talked about it with other aspects of optimizing mobile apps, this process doesn't end. You make your best step at the beginning, and then just keep refining and tweaking. Like, never give up on that, because your competitors, your current competitors, or people that are coming along, as fast followers are going to be optimizing to create a better experience. So you need to be too. So again, diving into this idea of a hook, one easy way to do this, and I learned this on an app that I worked on where we were providing a TV guide and remote control. It was mostly Android devices, but you could literally turn on and turn off your TV set and your VCR, back when people had VCRs, and air conditioners, you name it, with this remote control on your phone. And then it also had a TV guide. So we aggregated TV data from around the world, the schedule data, what was showing, and had that available on your app. And what we realized was pretty quickly is we had a feature where you could program a reminder to come back when your favorite show was on, or a movie that you wanted to see was going to be showing. The way to do that, and again, with streaming media, obviously this app doesn't make any sense, but back when you had schedules that you were regularly looking at on phones, we figured out that if we could get that person to set a reminder to come back, it kind of guaranteed a second return to the app. So if you have some kind of calendar functioning, and you can have that user as part of the onboarding flow or initial app experience, get them to schedule uses is done. Anytime you can track, if people know that you're tracking their behavior, it gives them a reason to return. Again, if you have an engagement platform integrated in, you can send them a reminder to come back and check the data from their last usage of the app. So this obviously works well with sleep apps, but there's a lot of different, sports-related apps, fitness apps, anything that has you setting some kind of goal or tracking some kind of behavior, monitoring your health. You can remind people to come back and check out that data that's being tracked. Gamification, of course, is like a huge way to get people coming back. If you have, the latest thing, it's not that new, but I'm seeing it more and more in different types of apps, is people are using this idea of a streak. How many days in a row can you come back to the app and use it? And, how long of a streak can you generate? How long of a streak can you generate relative to people in your social circle? Can you, competitively or collaboratively boost each other and remind each other so that you can mutually engage in these streaks? There's lots of different ways you can do that, but the idea is you're getting people to come back because you've gamified the experience. The example there is from Duolingo. Duolingo is so good at this. They've got, not only they have streaks, but they have leaderboards. They have different levels in the leaderboards. They reward you with gems and all kinds of things. Like, the more frequently, when you come back during non-peak usage, like if you come back like Saturday morning, you get, special bonus rewards because you're coming back at Saturday or like in the middle of the night or whenever it is, they're rewarding you for that return behavior. So that's really critical if you can build those things in. Obviously, the way you message that, I've got a lot of different apps on my phone, and they're all, sending me kind of daily reminder messages that are tied into my usage of that app, either data or some other experience or someone's trying to contact me through that app. So as much as you can kind of, reach out to people through your messaging platform to remind them of those reasons for returning, the better off you are. And then the last one, that's a travel app. That's kind of a community travel app. It's one of our customers. And the idea is, let's build a way, where your fellow users can encourage people back because they're creating content that's going to be of interest. In this case, it's travel content. They're sharing their own travel experiences, which you can kind of live through vicariously. So again, the more you can kind of build in UGC content into your experience, the better off you're going to be. All right. So I think that's the last slide here on this presentation, but thanks everyone for joining us.